Hey guys, thanks for joining me for the second demonstration of the recording course module. Here we're going to go into more specific detail of the MIDI and sampler instruments found within Reason. So we'll talk more about those instruments and some of the parameters and changes that you can make on them to fine-tune your sounds and make your instruments sound exactly the way you want them. Let's go ahead and get started. In today's demonstration, I wanted to dive in and take a closer look at some of the MIDI instruments and samplers found within Reason, just so you can get a better understanding of how these work and how you can use them in your music productions. Since a lot of musicians and engineers tend to begin with drum beats to get a groove going for their song, we're going to start by taking a focused look at the drum machine redrum. Within the redrum interface, you'll notice that there are 10 different sections up here. What these are individual drum elements that you can add into this drum machine. So just like we choose presets for patches on other instruments, we can choose individual elements that are going to go into each one of these sections. And I can preview them by pressing the play button here. Now, like I said, you can choose individual presets for each one of these sections, or you can choose entire kits from down here that will fill up all of these different sections with one preset. Next, we'll have to take a look at the programmer area of the redrum interface. This is where I can actually pick and choose when each of these individual elements are going to be played. In order to program my drums, I select which element I want to program, in this case, a kick drum, and then I just have to decide where in the timeline I want to hear the kick drum. I want to hear it on every beat. Now I can hit the run button to hear how this sounds. Okay. But we need to add a little more to this to make it more interesting. So I'm going to select the snare drum sound here, and now I'm going to program that as well. Now I can hit the run button again just to see how things sound with both the bass and the snare drum. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. But I think you could use some cymbals. Let's throw in some hi-hats. So I'll select that element and then program however I feel fit. Let's hear how that sounds. Starting to sound like a real drum loop. So let's say that this is how I want it to sound in my production. I need to now enter this down into the Reason sequencer window. So I'm going to right click on the redrum itself, and then I'm going to copy pattern to track. You'll see that I copied this exact pattern into the sequencer window between the loop points. So now if I simply press play, I'm going to hear the exact loop that I created. Cool! However, much like many things in a digital audio workstation, there's more than one way to program this redrum drum machine. I'm going to delete the loop that I just placed here. Now I'm going to show you how you can actually perform a drum performance on your MIDI keyboard. As soon as I open up the redrum interface, my MIDI keyboard is actually going to be associated with all of these elements here. So if I play the very first note on my keyboard, I hear the kick drum. Likewise with the snare and other instruments and so on. So I can actually hit record and perform in real time on my MIDI keyboard a drum performance. I'm going to go ahead and put the metronome on and give myself a count off, and then I'm just going to play a very simple bass drum and snare drum performance. There. Now if I go and listen to that back without the metronome, sounds just like a regular drum performance, although I performed it on a MIDI keyboard. Next, I wanted to show you a little more about the Dr. Octorex loop player in Reason. This is interesting because this loop player allows you to select between drums, different percussion, and even piano and guitar loops as well. So you really have a lot of versatility with this loop player. In this example, I feel like I just want some extra percussion to complement the drum beat that I already started on the redrum. What I've done is going into the presets and selected a tambourine patch. Let's listen to how that sounds. I like the way that sounds. It complements the drums nicely. But you'll notice that I, again, don't actually have the drum loop information here in my sequencer window. So just like we did with the redrum, in order to get the performance into the sequencer window, we're going to highlight the instrument, right-click, and copy loop to track. Now I can just press play and listen to the song that I have started. Definitely getting more interesting. Next, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about samplers. So we'll take a closer look at the NNXT advanced sampler found in Reason. Samplers are interesting because instead of actually creating a sound themselves, they actually use a recording of a sound to replicate that particular instrument. In this case, someone has actually recorded what every single note on a baby grand piano sounds like and entered it into the sampler. So when I perform on my MIDI keyboard, I get a very realistic replication of a baby grand piano. If I browse through the presets here for the NNXT sampler, I can also find that there are all sorts of samples available to me, from bass and brass to orchestral things such as string sections, and one very unique thing is that I can actually create my own instruments by inserting my own samples. So if I had, say, a rare kind of guitar around the house, I could record myself playing individual notes on that guitar, enter them into the NNXT, and then play those sounds from my MIDI keyboard. Finally, I wanted to spend some time with the MIDI synthesizer subtractor in Reason. These MIDI synthesizers come in very handy in your music productions because there are so many presets available to you, and also because of the extreme flexibility offered by all the parameters available to you. If we browse some of the preset patches available for the subtractor, you'll see that you have a large list of bass, synth, pad sounds, even some percussion sounds that you could be using. As I mentioned earlier, these MIDI synthesizers are very handy because there are so many parameters available to you in order to adjust your sounds and tweak them to fit your music productions more accurately. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on amplitude envelopes, which are these sections over here. Many of the instruments and synthesizers, even the drum machines that you use within Reason, are going to have these amplitude envelopes. So a very limited knowledge of what these can do is going to help you in creating your sounds. Each amplitude envelope is divided into 4 sections. They include attack, decay, sustain, and release. And all these 4 parameters help shape your sounds in different ways. I'm going to demonstrate how you can use the amplitude envelopes to sculpt a sound by first recording a bass performance for this song. Now that we have a bass performance for our song, I'm going to let this run on repeat while adjusting some of these amplitude envelope parameters, just so you can see what it is they do to a sound. So you get a really good sense of how all these different parameters for your amplitude envelopes can, in effect, change your sound quite drastically. Another common way to sculpt your sounds in a MIDI synthesizer is to adjust the frequency filters here. So again, let's play this bass part on a loop and begin adjusting our frequency filters. So as I decrease the frequency filter, less sound is being let through. If I increase it, you'll hear more. You can also very easily sculpt your sound into something a little more interesting by adjusting the portamento function. This is also sometimes known as glide, and what it does is it actually increases the amount of time that it takes to go from one note to the next, and it actually allows you to hear all the notes in between. I'll show you how it works. Sometimes the extreme settings get kind of wacky, but if you experiment, you'll find just the right settings for your music productions. Now, although it's fun to go through and change some of these parameters to sculpt your sound, but what happens if, say, you wanted to make some of these sounds evolve or change over time instead of staying the same constantly throughout the entire song? We can perform a process called automation, and Reason, the digital audio workstation, makes this fairly simple. One common parameter on an instrument to automate is the filter frequencies that we were messing with earlier. So let's say that towards the end of this loop, I wanted the bassline to increase in intensity. So I want to increase the frequency filter. Let me demonstrate. But if I play that same loop over again, how is the frequency filter going to change unless I physically do it myself? Well, we can automate this parameter function. We can accomplish this one of two ways. We can literally draw in the changes that we want ourselves, or we can record them in real time. So what I'm going to do this time through is record as I play through the loop, and then make this change, and it will be recorded into the sequencer window. So now if we replay this, you'll notice that this filter frequency parameter is going to move all by itself. But let's say we wanted to make the movements on the frequency filter more rapid. I can double click on the automation window here and take my pencil tool and actually draw in how I want that parameter to be moved. So let's say I want it to go up and down much more frequently. Now the performance that I drew is going to be reflected here by automation. Let's take a listen. Now, automation can be performed to basically any parameter that you see on any single instrument, in the mixing window. Anything can be automated to make gradual changes over time. So you can see how there's really an extreme amount of flexibility to make your music productions much more interesting. At this point, you should have a better understanding of the MIDI and sampler instruments found within the digital audio workstation Reason, and also a better understanding of how you can record those performances or literally draw them in and edit them so they are perfected just the way you want them. Also, we spent a lot of time doing some sound design, so you should also have a better understanding of how to manipulate the parameters on any instruments to sculpt them into the sounds that you want. Have fun, and remember, sometimes the most logical choice isn't always the best, so get creative and have fun. See you next time.